We've got some big Football Manager news to cover today, a massive announcement from Sports Interactive about changes coming to transfers and how they're going to work in FM26, and we're also going to talk about some more disappointing news that kind of went under the radar a little bit in the FM community. A few people have picked up on it, but we're going to talk about it today. So we've got one fairly good thing, and we'll see what you guys think about it. Of course, we always want to know what you think in the comments, and one thing that I think is going to be a negative. So let's start with the negative and get on to the positive after. And the headline for this is pretty simple. I could break it down and drag this out as long as I could, but realistically, all that's happening is international management is not going to be in FM26 at launch. Now, I've got a few issues with this that we'll talk about, but of course, if you don't know the story, it was meant to be in FM25, but then when the game got delayed initially, they said, we're not going to have it in that game, we're going to put it in FM26 instead, because they're trying to rework it and make it better. Great. Of course, then FM25 gets cancelled, and then the question is, will this international management be in FM26, or will it then get pushed back an extra year to FM27, or of course later on in the life cycle of the new FM26 game in some kind of update? We didn't know whether it was coming, but this interview has confirmed it, and my biggest issue with it all is it was basically done in some kind of interview with, I think, a Korean publication, and Miles basically mentioned it off the cuff. They had to take a few things out of the game to make sure they got the core of FM26 right, which isn't the end of the world, but international management I think will be a big miss. And it's disappointing it's not in the game, but even more disappointing is the fact that, again, with this Sports Interactive and the reveal of the game, the communication is the thing that I always find strange. Like, that should be something that they made a tweet about, they posted about it, make a big deal about it, instead of it just being mentioned as oh yeah, international management's not in the game. There's a lot of people that were waiting to hear about that and wanted to know. And it was in a random interview in a different language, and if it wasn't for people translating it, then a lot of the FM community wouldn't know anything about whether it was going to be in the game or not. Now, I assume they will mention it at some point in the reveals before we get access to the beta, but I thought, again, the communication there has been a little bit off. I'd rather that have been addressed normally, but alas, we move on. International management will not be in the game, but what will be is a recruitment revamp and a change to how transfers work. Now, of course, with FM26, as we've covered many times, the game is being built on a new engine, and with that, we have a totally new user interface where the game's going to look different to before. You can already see this looks totally different to what FM looks like currently with the base skin. Some people have liked this style, some people not so much, but this is the first time we're getting a deep dive into recruitment and the changes they've made. Now, there's a little video that goes along with this post, but the video is basically just these screenshots that we're seeing now. Here we've got the write-up about it, so I'm going to go through. The first thing they mention is that recruitment as part of this overhaul UI is going to be simpler and more intuitive to navigate. You'll be having everything in this recruitment hub, so that's scouting and transfers being brought into one area of the game. You can see in the image here that you've got the player database, which is where you can search for players normally, player recommendations, so that's going to be the ones that your scouts bring to you, recruitment focuses, shortlist, squad planners, transfer activity, and a lot of that is also shown on this screen here. Now, I will say, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the way this looks. I actually think it's a bit overloaded in terms of information on one screen, and there's not enough stuff that pops out to me. I kind of like that when you used to go on the scouting tab, you'd have a player card, you'd have your scouts review of him, and you could say yes or no to him. Now, I'm not saying that isn't in one of these tabs in the game somewhere, but as a base hub for your transfers and your scouting, I'm not a huge fan, but maybe that's just me because I'm not used to it and I like the way FM used to look. I've liked a lot of the things that they've revealed recently, but for some reason, this screen doesn't scream out to me as something that I think looks like an improvement, put it that way. I'm not saying it's worse, but does it look all that much better? I'm not sure, especially when they say it's simpler and more intuitive to navigate. I'd argue, to me, it looks a bit more convoluted here and there's too much info on one screen. But again, I want to hear your thoughts. Maybe I'm just being old about it because of the way that I've played FM. Now, as with pretty much everything they've described with the new UI, most of these tiles will be clickable. I mean, the fact that player database is shown here, but if you click into it, I assume you then get taken to the screen shown there where you get to see it in more detail. So I imagine you can jump into the areas that you want to jump into, but there's some things here that you might not have associated with transfers that are now in this image. The first one being the squad planner, and they do talk about this. The squad planner has now been brought in to the transfers tab, basically, or the recruitment tab as they're calling it. So you can see the immediate needs of your squad, where there might be depth issues, allowing you to see straight away where you need to buy players. Now, I love the squad planner and I use it a lot, but I think a lot of people ignored it, and maybe putting it here is going to make it a more common feature for people to use. So I don't hate that all that much. Bringing the squad planner into recruitment, that makes quite a bit of sense. It was in a whole separate section of the game previously, but realistically, the squad planner's objective is to help you find find where you are light, help you sign players for those positions. So for it to be in the recruitment tab is cool. But you will see something new here where it says transfer room out, 53 opportunities, 0 players offered, and transfer room in. And we'll get onto that in a little bit about exactly what this means. But in this same recruitment tab, you can also deal with the contract situation at your club. So this is normally an email that you get in the game if you haven't seen it, where it tells you how long some of your players have got left on their contract. Now you can see that anytime in the contract section, get a review of which players you should offer a contract to, who you shouldn't, and figure things out that way. It also gives you a breakdown of the players that have got less than 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 1 to 2 years, or 2 years plus on their deals. So you can keep tabs of that and make sure all the players that you want to stick around are sticking around as long as possible. But something that stuck out to me that isn't really mentioned here is this little bit here where it says 4 FFP requirements. Now, FFP in football recently, it's a huge deal, teams getting points deductions and whatnot, whereas in Football Manager, you had to do quite a lot wrong to ever fail FFP, but clearly now it's going to be a bigger part of the game and have more restrictions on your recruitment. But speaking of recruitment, that brings us nicely onto the new transfer tools. FM26's 2 biggest recruitment additions have been powered by their partners at Transfer Room, which is what real-life clubs supposedly use to find players, and they can be found in the overview screen. Now, you used to be able to offer players for sale via Transfer Room, which was basically just offering players for sale that you could do in the game previously. It just had some kind of branded name. But now they've added 2 new features, requirements and pitch opportunities. Now, requirements is the first thing that we're going to focus on, and this is all to do with when you're buying players. Now, what this requirements is, it's basically a way that you can communicate to every other club in the game and specify what you're looking for in the transfer market. It's like when you send a scout out on a recruitment focus to find a right winger. I'm sure you'll be able to do that too, but now you can basically ask all these clubs in world football, I need a right winger that can cut in on his left foot and play a good cross, and teams will come forward with the players that they might be willing to sell. Now, I think that's a nice addition, but is it just the same thing as what you could do with your director of football before, where you just ask for free centre-back targets on a free transfer and he gives you it straight away? It's probably something similar to that, or at least uses the same functionality, but I will admit the whole director of football transfer suggestions was pretty hidden, so to have it here in the main section of the game, it's definitely not a drawback. Now, you can do this for player roles that you're interested in, both for in and out of possession, so in and out of possession roles will be something that you can scout for and request, which is obviously what you'd probably expect with them adding these new roles to the game. But the feature I like better than requirements is the pitch opportunities, which is the reverse basically. So it allows you to see what other teams want. So there might be another team out there looking for a young central midfielder who can play deep. And if you have that kind of player, it looks like you'll be able to offer them out, and hopefully that way you can get some interest in your players. Now, when I read this, my first thought went to loans, because if you can see what teams want, say, a striker, you can then find a team that will actually play your loan player, as opposed to what normally happens, where you give a player to a team on loan and they don't end up getting played, even though it looked like a great move. So these 2 new additions look like they'll be pretty cool. I don't think they're necessarily groundbreaking, but certainly useful. And then they get onto the second section, which is smarter scouting. Now, to sum it up, your scouts can now look for out and in possession roles, as mentioned earlier. The scout reports and advice are apparently smarter too, allowing you to see which players will fit the formations you're using. But then there's some under the hood changes. The fact that some teams will now try and find young players to satisfy their club vision. So if Chelsea was managed by an AI manager, they might only sign younger players, because that seems to be the target of the board currently. Further tweaks to the AI squad building is mentioned, but what that means, who knows. There is another mention of FFP though, so clearly that's playing a bigger effect this year. New transfer clauses, which are shown here. You can add clauses for individual player awards, which I imagine most people are just going to abuse. Nathan Ake is a great example here. You could put a 100 million clause if Nathan Ake wins the Ballon d'Or, knowing he never will, and maybe get your transfer deal cheaper. Hopefully the game doesn't allow you to do that and will recognise when it's a silly offer, but we'll see. And there's apparently better logic surrounding preferred positions in loan negotiations, more loans with future fees and buybacks, and improvements to when players are recalled by the AI when on loan. Now, all of that, we're only going to know how good it works once we see it in game, but they certainly seem like good improvements, and I've always said I want some of the AI with transfers to be better. There's no mention here of the other teams making realistic offers, which they don't tend to do in other FM games. Sometimes they'll offer you £1 for a player that's clearly worth way more than that, so that's something to note. But that is the bulk of the new reveals for both scouting and transfers. It's all brought into this one recruitment tab, which has squad building as part of it and many other features. Does it look cool to you? Like I say, to me some of the screens look a bit convoluted and there's a bit too much going on, but what do you guys think? Do you think it looks better? Let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.